If it means anything, I wanted to like this movie. That's... yeah. Alright crew, welcome back to the set of another Cinema Jacket review. I didn't get to do the structure video I wanted to do. I have this very specific structure to these reviews I want to try to do, but I'm kind of pressed for time this weekend. Vacation's coming up, so I'm just kind of get this video out there to the masses so they can see yet another review of Justice League telling you it's not Citizen Kane. Now, I saw Justice League last night with a friend, and the thing about seeing a movie with friends, whether it's one or it's a group of friends, is when I see a movie with a friend, I usually end up enjoying the movie, at least on an entertainment level. I went and saw Pompeii, that really terrible Paul W.S. Anderson movie. What was it? How many years ago was that? It was 2014? That was 3 years ago, I think. And I saw it with a friend, and I walked out thinking, it was fine, it wasn't terrible, it definitely wasn't awful. And then I saw the movie again a couple months later on DVD or Blu-ray or whatever, alone, and it was awful. And so I was kind of thinking, okay, maybe if I bring a friend to Justice League, I won't be as harsh on it. Maybe I'll find some more enjoyment in it rather when I'm by myself and my cynical, dark soul and I are just conversing while we're watching this movie. And it didn't really help. If I had to give you like a sentence-long review right here in the beginning of the video, I would say this is a boring, chaotic, and confusing movie. That's about it. I mean, obviously, I'm going to go into details, and I want to get the negatives out of the way first, just so that we can end on a high note of what's good. And I'm not going to spend very long on the negatives, because you've probably seen very many reviews on this already, and you're sick of hearing the negatives. You're like, blah, 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 that sucks. Yeah, I want to hear something that's good about this, and I understand that, because I don't like hating movies. I love when I walk into a movie and I'm surprised, and I love to love movies. So when I have to hate on a movie, it just puts me in a bad mood. Unless it's something like the Emoji Movie, where it was kind of hilarious that it was even made. So let's get the negatives out of the way best we can. One of the things that is glaring in this movie is the lackluster CGI. Now, the friend that I went with and I, during one of the opening shots, we just kind of stood there with our mouths open, and we're like, this passes in 2017, a comic book blockbuster movie. There are multiple moments of this in which it just looks like a PNG of something from a distance, and the CG is actually some of the worst visual effects I have seen in a big blockbuster since probably Gods of Egypt. I think there are even bad parts in Gods of Egypt that are better than in this movie. There is a shot where a character is carrying away a building, and it looks like something you could probably find on, any 12-year-old's, After Effects tutorial video on YouTube. And I was shocked by this, because I was going to say, well, at least we're going to get some good CGI, some good action. And the CG was pretty awful. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. There are some very terrible moments of CGI in this movie, especially during the fight scenes. During the fight scenes, it's very clear that a lot of these characters, there is no actual people in the shot. It's a lot of CGI creations bouncing about the screen in this very chaotic manner, and part of why it looks so fake is because often it's wide shots and all that stuff. It's the Peter Jackson effect of trying to show the grandiosity of a battle. Sometimes it works, you're like, oh cool, that's a lot of people charging right now, that's kind of cool, and the music is fine for the scene, you're like, okay, it kind of hits me right here, it's kind of awe-inspiring. But the way in which they film a lot of these action scenes using these CGI creations rather than a physical actor in the scene, it's that close quarters kind of thing they use in the later Taken movies, Taken 2 and 3, a lot of modern day action movies use this, where it's kind of very close quarters and it's kind of moving around like this. It's not quite shaky cam, but there is nothing really to focus on because there's nothing that seems real on screen. So it just becomes a blend of, I think that was a 3D shape. There's some pixels flying this way that are different color from these pixels. And because of this, that's why I say this movie is chaotic and confusing. Sometimes a character will make a very distinct action. You have no idea where that action was directed towards, if it hit its mark, if it didn't hit its mark, and you have no idea what effect that action had on whatever they were directing it towards. Now, an example of this is in the final battle of this movie. Obviously, there's the final battle with the villain. This movie is pretty by the books and how you structure a movie, so I don't really feel like I'm getting into spoilers here. But they're fighting this big baddie, and, you get the whole, multiple people are fighting him, and these people are getting smacked around. Like, there's an axe being used on these people, they're getting hit around, and you never really feel like there's any tension. You never feel worried about these characters, because they get hit, and then they, they hit the floor, and then they stand up and go right back at it. You never feel like there's a moment where these are people. I mean, well, some of them aren't quite people. Like, some of them are like demigods and Atlanteans and stuff like that. But for a majority of these characters, they are some semblance of a human being. And when a human being is knocked down, whether they stub their toe or get hit by a semi-truck, there are effects that will have on them. Whether they look winded or they hold their side for a moment, there's none of that. It just feels like they are robotic in they're without emotion. The action scenes in this movie are devoid of all emotion, which any action scene needs to have that to carry the weight of what's happening. The urgency needs to be there in every scene, and this movie does not have any urgency in any of the scenes. Obviously, you get the obligatory, oh no, there's a family that needs to be saved, you go save them, and you get a bit of the, oh, I'm a human and they're a human, I don't want them to die. And that's really the only connection you get there, and then that scene is done, and you're like, oh, okay, I mean, you can go back to fighting faceless goons and not really being affected by that. Now, I really, really hate to do this because I realize how divisive this movie is, but, and stay with me here, in the Avengers movies, whether you love them or whether you hate them, there is camaraderie between all of these people because there are scenes in which they learn more about them, and those qualities of them carry over into fights, they carry into battles, they carry into any conflict they have with their friends or their enemies. Now, of course, there are scenes in this movie where they need to have an argument because they're a team and they have to be dysfunctional. And that has worked out really well, and it has not worked out really well for a lot of movies. But in this movie, you never really feel like they're having a real argument. I mean, obviously they're going to argue about, should we do this, should we do that, should we do blah blah blah. And obviously there's going to be disagreements. But these characters never really feel like they're really butting heads, aside from this one person makes a snarky comment, this other character pushes them, and it's like, okay, that was the conflict of the scene. And then after, you can have a little bit of a narrative scene where you go off, get yourself a vodka, and then you're going to apologize. And there's really not a whole lot interesting about a team with no real conflict within them. Conflict is what makes people more dynamic, and that's what changes how they interact with each other in conversations and on the battlefield. Now, I'm going to get into some specifics here character-wise. Don't worry, there's no spoilers here. I don't want to spoil anything for you. Whether you want to hate this movie or don't want to hate this movie, I think that not knowing spoilers is going to strengthen whether you love or hate this movie, or it could change your mind. So here we go. Wonder Woman constantly looks like she's confused and doesn't know what to do in these scenes. I don't know if that's the direction, I don't know if it's the writing, but she constantly is given next to nothing to do other than repeatedly punch the main bad guy or these guys. And there's no real purpose for any character other than you do this one thing. Every character has that scene where they have their one power come in handy, but you never really see them using all their powers together in a way that feels cohesive. Aquaman is a damsel in distress in this movie. I mean, that's a bit of a strong term, but what I mean is he constantly has to be saved. He constantly feels like, well, he's the least superpowered because he's not in water right now, he's on land, he has a trident, pitchfork thing, and he just constantly has to be saved. It makes him kind of feel like... It makes him constantly feel like a liability to the group, especially when you're watching it and you start paying attention to how often Aquaman has to depend on other people to actually do stuff for him. It just kind of gets annoying. There's a good scene for Aquaman in this movie where it kind of establishes him as this hero, but he's also kind of an a-hole, and you're like, okay, yeah, you're kind of cool. I actually did kind of like Aquaman in this movie when he wasn't being a damsel in distress. And again, he gets that one moment in the movie where he uses this big power, and it's like, oh cool, he saved us, now you can go back to whatever it is you're doing. Now, the Flash in this movie was bordering on Jar Jar Binks levels of annoyance for me. And which is weird because I really thought that he was going to be, you know, he's the comic relief. I actually enjoyed him for the first part of the movie, but then it gets to the point where they were doing what Marvel does, is the buzzkill humor, I call it. And it's just, you have this scene where it's emotionally charged, and you are getting into this, the narrative is, you know, you're on your seat, you're like, this is a good conversation, people, like, things are being said, things are getting done within this conversation. And then it breaks the pace of the conversation because somebody has to make some stupid joke and comment on something dramatic, and all of a sudden, it's just like, you ruin the flow of the scene. And it happens extremely often. Now, this is where I will admit, Marvel is getting a little too comfortable with this buzzkill humor. And it shows, especially in Doctor Strange. I think Doctor Strange is the biggest offender of this. Still a fun movie, but now I'm seeing that DC is trying their hand at this kind of humor. Now, as for Cyborg, I mean, he just feels extremely emo the entire time. Like, I half expect there to be a scene where he's like slitting his wrists or something. He's just so brooding the entire time. And then there's a huge tonal change about halfway through the movie when this big kind of scene happens. All of a sudden he's like cracking jokes and he's like, you know, being all silly. But tonally, he just changed drastically from, I'm gonna brood, I'm gonna sit in my room and I'm gonna cut my robotic wrists with a screwdriver. And then suddenly he's just saying booyah, and I expected him to be like a ninja, like, yeah, we're Blanca, dude! Now, if anything, Cyborg should have been either brooding the entire time, which I really don't think he should have because we have Batman to do that for us, or he should have been comedic relief. He could have been a really good friend for Flash. There is a moment where you could kind of see the beginning of this in the scene, but honestly, it's like that's a huge missed opportunity to have two people who can work off of each other really well, have some really good chemistry between them, but you never get that. Everybody is so focused on interjecting their comment one person at a time in a circle of 6 people, rather than having any of these friendships or chemistry in between certain people but not with other characters. Now we come to Batman. I thought about this. I actually really did think about this, and I watched Batman and Robin today, and I'm confident in what I'm about to say. This is the worst on-screen Batman in just this movie. I'm not saying BVS was the same. This is the worst on-screen iteration of Batman I have ever seen, if you're just looking at this movie. I don't know what happened to Batman. He was boring, he got annoying, and he was also tonally inconsistent. I think that is to do with the changing between Zack Snyder and Joss Whedon's vision. But Ben Affleck often looks bored. He never really seems to be putting much into what he's doing. I mean, I'm not asking for him to give some Oscar speech or anything, but even in the scenes where he's just talking or just in the action scenes, it feels like he's phoning it in. There's these rumors of, is Ben Affleck leaving? I believe him. This is not the performance you give in a big movie if you want to be kept around by fans and executives. It's just not. Now, I'm going to get into the Joss Whedon versus the Zack Snyder scenes. You do not really have to be paying attention all that much to notice a huge tonal shift or in the way it's shot or directed to know, oh, that's a Joss Whedon scene or this is a Zack Snyder scene. Most of the time it was very jarring to the point where it kind of pulled me out and I was like, wait, is this another movie starting right now? Because they're so different in the way that they helm the scenes that it feels very night and day. It often feels like the movie is fighting itself. I mean, obviously there has to be a producer, executive producers in place to make sure it's consistent the entire way through. But Joss Whedon's scenes are often so far off the mark from what Zack Snyder was doing, it often comes off jarring, and it puts the whole movie off. One last thing, this movie is a tragic waste of J.K. Simmons. Maybe he's going to be in the Batman trilogy that Matt Reeves is going to do, but he didn't need to be in this movie at all. In fact, it was just kind of a waste of time. Now, as I said, I'm going to get into the positives. The best moments in the film is when two characters are just interacting, whether it's Cyborg and Wonder Woman, or Aquaman and Batman. When the whole team is not there, and it's just a one-on-one between some members of the team, that's when you really get the characters to just kind of have a spark of the chemistry that I wish they had through the entire movie. Now, there are plenty of these scenes, and I don't want to get into details because some of them are spoilers, but just know that there are scenes in which characters are interacting that I actually think is a step in the right direction for the DCEU. Alright guys, so now for my grade. Now the way that I grade this is I'm not going to put a letter grade on it or a number grade on it. I want to rank them in a way that I understand. So if I was doing like a Thor Ragnarok review, I would just show a list of the other MCU films and rank it like that. So, right now, I'm gonna put Justice League right about there. So yeah, that's what I thought about Justice League. I'm sorry if you wanted me to say more good stuff and more bad stuff, I don't know. It's a hard movie to review because you kind of alienate an entire crowd whether you love it or hate it, and if you're a mixed bag, then people just kind of get bored because you don't have a strong opinion in or against their favor. So, that's what I thought about Justice League. Watch for my Punisher review, that's going to be up in a couple days. Fantastic series, I will say that. And thank you guys so much for watching, and that's a wrap.